Emma Wheeler once said, "The education of females has been exclusively directed to fit them for displaying to advantage the charms of youth and beauty. Thought well to decorate the blossom, it is far better to prepare for the harvest." In other words, Emma encourages women to not be concerned with the externals, but believe the internals are what makes us who we are. We won't be remembered for our height, weight, hair color, or size. It is the impact we made on people's lives that will be remembered. Emma Hart was born on February the 23rd, 1787, to Samuel and Lydia Hisdale Hart on farm in Berlin, Connecticut. The 16th of 17 children, she was fortunate enough to have a father who believed in educating his daughters as well as his sons. Emma's father was a liberal thinker and thought it was out of the ordinary to be educated. He encouraged her to disregard the norms of the day and seek an education. Because of her father's support, she began to acquire an education that was out of the ordinary for girls. Emma was mostly self-taught, and at the age of 13 she had taught herself geometry. In 1802 she took a significant step and enrolled in her first school, the Berlin Academy. Emma progressed so rapidly in the environment that she soon began teaching the younger children at her academy. In 1806, she took charge of the school for the entire winter term. Emma's natural appetite for learning has persuaded her to attend classes in Hartford during these years and began exploring the possibility of beginning a school for women beyond the confines of their immediate communities. At the age of 20, she took a job as an assistant at the academy in Westfield, Massachusetts. That summer she went to Middlebury, Vermont to become principal of the female academy there. It was here that she met Dr. John Willard, a local physical and supporter of female education. They later married on August 10, 1809. After her marriage, she set aside teaching and continued her education through her husband's nephew, who lived with them while studying at Middlebury College. Emma developed an appreciation of college studies and followed his work in geometry and philosophy.
Unfortunately, the Vermont State Bank was robbed in 1812, causing major financial losses for her husband, Dr. Willard. Emma proposed to open a girls' boarding school in their home to make up for their financial loss, and her husband eventually approved of her proposal. She called the school the Midbury Female Seminary, and here she intended to remedy some of the educational disadvantages of young women. Since she was not allowed to attend classes at Middlebury College, she taught herself mathematics and physical science, subjects previously closed to female students, so that she could teach them to the girls in her school. By doing this, she proved that she could teach and have young women learn and master the classical and scientific studies that were previously only taught to men. Later, she advanced toward the collegiate level in mathematics, science, philosophy, history, and geography by developing lessons from her own studies. She did not, however, provide exactly what college offered to young men. Emma continued the art and music classes that were customary for girls, but not boys, and added exercise, rest, and recreation to preserve health and enthusiasm. On the other hand, she neither required nor offered classical languages, and there was no sequence of studies leading to a degree. She cultivated a following by inviting prominent citizens to witness examinations, and boarding students carried her reputation across Vermont and the Hudson Valley. Once she had demonstrated her ability to learn them without becoming less suited for women's place in society, she was ready to expand. Her aim was the public funding accord to many institutions for young men and boys. When plans fell through for a female seminary on the college grounds in Burlington, she sought patrons in New York. Willard began lobbying in Albany by asking Governor DeWitt Clinton to support her ideas. With his endorsement, she published an address to the public, particularly to the members of the legislature of New York, proposing a plan for improving female education. A strongly argued discourse that she had been developing for several years. Her final argument was that such a school was necessary to the well-being of the Republic, because it would prepare women to be better wives and mothers and also provide capable teachers who could be paid less than men.
The New York legislature responded by chartering the Academy for Young Ladies that Willard had already been invited to establish in Waterford, and by making it the first female institution to share in the state lottery fund. This enabled her to expand enrollment and curriculum beyond what she had achieved in Middlebury. But the legislature twice failed to agree on a regular appropriation, and her supporters in Waterford would not continue paying her lease. The Common Council of nearby Troy saw her frustration as their opportunity. They resolved in 1821 to raise $4,000 for a building, and she immediately established herself there. Dr. Willard was necessarily the appropriator, because a married woman's business could only be conducted in her husband's name. He was also an active manager until his death in 1825. The Troy Female Seminary prospered despite continuing rejection of Willard's petitions for legislative support. Enrollment increased from 90 in the first class to 340 in 1837, a third of whom were from other cities or states. Willard used her growing prosperity to admit some students whose families were unable to pay, only on the understanding that they would reimburse her from their earnings as teachers. In 1837, she founded the Willard Association for the mutual improvement of female teachers to guide their development and broaden her influence. Many of the seminary's teachers were former students, although it was necessary to look further and pay more for experts in performance fields such as music and French. When Willard visited Europe in 1830, her reputation as an educator and her acquaintance with the Marquess de Lafayette from his 1824 visit to Troy enabled her to mingle with the leading educational reformers in France and England. The course of study continued to expand. Willard herself enhanced the offerings in history and geography. Amos Eaton, senior professor at Troy's Institute, taught science from experiments and tutored Willard's sister, Almira Lincoln Phelps, until she and other female teachers were able to take over. Language electives were Spanish, French, and Latin. Mathematics, philosophy, and theology remained staples for advanced students. The success of Willard schools owed to her ability to help children understand what they were learning, as well as to her special offerings for advanced students. She began reaching for a broader audience even while she was implementing her plan at Waterford and Troy. First, she collaborated with William Woodbridge on a system of universal geography on the principles of comparison and classification in 1822, contributing the section on the ancient world, then produced Geography for Beginners in 1826 on her own. Next, she wrote A History of the United States in 1828 and A System of the Universal History in Perspective in 1835. All these books were distinctive for their use of maps, charts, and concepts, in contrast to their emphasis on memorizing names, dates, and places in widely used texts of this day. They also encourage readers to see the United States in the context of its historical development and in comparison with the other nations. Willard went home to Berlin, Connecticut, to restore her spirits after her divorce with Christopher C. Gates and reestablish her respectability. Henry Barnard, recently appointed Secretary of the Connecticut Board of Commissioners for the Common Schools, welcomed her help with his reforms. Elected Superintendent of Common Schools in Kensington section of Berlin, She quickly reshaped the curriculum, staff, and facilities. Plans for a state normal school under her direction came to nothing when Barnard's position was abolished after the 1842 election. In 1843, she successfully petitioned the Connecticut legislature for divorce from Yates.
Returning to Troy in 1844, Willard remained important to the seminary as inspiration and advisor, but her main interest was writing books. She revised her history of the United States, recast her world history as Willard's historic guide to the Temple of Time and universal history in perspective, and wrote last leaves of American history, compromising histories of the Mexican War and California. She lived for months in New York and Philadelphia to work closely with her publishers, engaged in pamphlet warfare with the author of a competing U.S. history, and defended her geography copyrights against the Woodbridge estate. Willard wrote on other subjects from time to time. In the midst of putting her school on a better footing in 1820, she found time to contribute universal peace to be introduced by a confederacy of nations to the peace movement, and she offered a similar plan in 1864. Her poems were printed in 1831 at the request of former students. Willard's principal associations were with her family and former students. Her main organizing activity beyond her school was to encourage women to play a leading role in school reform. Twice she made broad appeals for women's support: to raise money for a normal school in newly independent Greece in 1833, and to petition for compromise between North and South in 1861. Locally, she impaneled women as overseers in her schools, but did not give them control, and she led occasional civic betterment efforts in Troy. Her principal friendships among prominent women of her time were with the writer Lydia Sigourney and the editor Sarah Hale. She was not intimate with other pioneers in female education, and she did not support the women's rights movement, although many of its leaders were educated on her model. Willard is most remembered for launching the advanced studies for girls that equipped growing numbers of women for a larger role in society and laid the groundwork for full-blown women's colleges. This achievement owed not only to her formidable intellect and energy, but also to her business acumen, political skill, and imposing personality and appearance. She was almost as important in her own time for her lively, expansive, and patriotic histories and geographies, which sold more than 1 million copies. Crucial to Willard's legacy is the tension between the boldness of her pursuits and the conventionality of her arguments. It is tempting to suppose that she deployed conservative rationalizations to mask revolutionary purpose, but her patterns of thought and action are consistent in her private writings and her public ones. When she used conventional ideas about women in her bold plan for improving female education, she was satisfied that teaching girls geometry would more readily enlarge their capacities as wives and mothers than pave their way to trigonometry. When she worked through male politicians and eschewed any involvement in women's rights, she was content to exert her influence through persuasion. Her passion for the Republic undergirded her regressive scheme to perpetuate slavery, as well as her progressive proposal to educate girls. Willard died in Troy 9 days after her last journey entry.